what is going on, guys? Is the SS Ultimate Goku back with another video, and we're gonna talk about kind of like the whole star of Hugh Jackman in Marvel and Wolverine. So with the recent official acquisition of 20th Century Fox, being acquired by Disney. It is essentially putting an end to a chapter of which was the original, I would say, how do I word this? The original Marvel before the definitive Marvel Cinematic Universe that we know today, which is Marvel Studios and the MCU. So the original Marvel, was basically just their own things with own studios bidding up to getting these characters on the big screen. And while superheroes were kind of already pretty out there with Batman, and the DC side of it, Marvel kind of wasn't there yet. They were kind of more in a flux because they didn't really have a backing like DC did in the 90s with Warner Brothers. So Marvel's was kind of more in the not known type area. I mean, some people knew about it, but more people inclined to know about DC than Marvel back in the 90s, because of superheroes like Batman, obviously, and Superman too, because there were Superman movies as well. So DC was more of a more familiar to the general public than Marvel during this era. Of course, Marvel was in no position during this time period to make movies because they didn't have a backing like DC did with Warner Brothers. So they leased out their theater character rights to other studios like Fox, Sony, and so on and so forth. And of course, as we know the story, Wolverine was one of those casualties because it was a popular franchise. It had been on TV for cartoon series and stuff like that. So there was a lot of interest for a character like Wolverine and X-Men and Spider-Man, and these are why these characters were licensed out in the first place, because these were characters that theater companies, or I should say, theater companies, pretty much were interested in. They were interested in getting these characters on the big screen because they seen how the success they were on these cartoon series. So they were much more obliged to get these guys out on the big screen. And while Marvel itself didn't really profit as much as the studios did, like Fox and Sony, to just name a few, they still did get publicity and advertising because it is their characters that are on the big screen that are being displayed. And of course, they did make merchandise for the films, which they did profit some stuff for as well. But one of the big stars, of course, as we all know, is Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman pretty much is the guy who defines Marvel, and pretty much, I would argue, is probably the first big-time Marvel star. So to speak, before there was an MCU, before there was other actors portraying other characters on Marvel or in Marvel, there was Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. And unlike, actors like Tobey Maguire as the original Spider-Man or whatever, Hugh Jackman pretty much was the Wolverine for 17 years. Which is a feat in itself. Tobey Maguire was pretty much gone by 2007, when they just decided, we're going to recast. So he never really got that defining, ness that Hugh Jackman got. Hugh Jackman pretty much was the guy. And before the MCU was a thing, he was Marvel. I mean, when you thought of actors that were portraying Marvel characters during the early 2000s, you probably thought of Hugh Jackman first. Of course, until the MCU was created. He was probably the guy, and I'm sure there are a bunch of MCU fans that still, that probably grew up, remembering Hugh Jackman because he probably was what set the stage for ultimately MCU. Hell, there was even a time where Kevin Feige, who had worked on the early Spider-Man and X-Men films, and he had even tried to get Hugh Jackman to appear in the original first Spider-Man film because he was already thinking about doing not MCU, but he was already thinking about having these superheroes cross over against each other before the MCU was even a thing. Of course, the studios denied him and denied Hugh Jackman because Hugh Jackman was all for it. I mean, Hugh Jackman and Kevin Feige are actually pretty close to a lot of people. He actually was in the casting process for Hugh Jackman to be getting the part for Wolverine. So there was a lot of things there. So he was all for this, and obviously Kevin Feige wanted this because he was already thinking about doing an MCU before MCU was even a thing. So unfortunately that never happened because Sony and Fox probably, and if it did happen, it probably wouldn't have ended well because I'm sure Sony and Fox would have ended up suing each other over it if it had happened, if they were able to get it in without the studios knowing. I'm sure there would have ended up being lawsuits from both studios. So it probably was for the best that it didn't happen. But ultimately, because of this, this has ultimately laid the groundwork for Kevin Feige to eventually leave Fox and Sony as executive producers and would ultimately go and create the MCU within the next few years. But Hugh Jackman continued being his role as Wolverine. And even when the MCU was, starting to get movies, out, like Iron Man, Hulk, and other films, as we all know, Hugh Jackman was still really the guy, when it came to Marvel. It wasn't really until probably Disney took over, the MCU or Marvel Studios when they purchased it, really, in maybe 2010, 2011-ish, really when, it started to shift more to a lot of these Marvel actors from the MCU that we all know today. But like I said, before there was a Chris Evans, before there was a Robert Downey, before there was a Scarlett, before there was Samuel L. Jackson, even though obviously Samuel L. Jackson is known for much more than just superhero films. But before there was any of these guys involved in these Marvel heroes, there was Hugh Jackman, and he really kind of, I would argue, laid the groundwork for a lot of these future actors that would ultimately become these MCU characters. I mean, Hugh, for a lot of people that did start liking or did start getting into the MCU, that watched the original Wolverine films before the MCU was around, for years had been like, we want Hugh in the MCU. Of course, that have never happened, but, because of studio, rights and issues and all that stuff. But, I mean, that's how big Hugh was as the Wolverine. I mean, he was literally the MCU character that was not in the MCU. I mean, that's how big, Hugh was as Wolverine. He was like an unofficial MCU character because he was that big of a star. He was a star before the MCU was a thing. That character was a star before the MCU was a thing. So he was kind of viewed that way. And that's why a lot of people always wanted to see him, at least for one movie, be in the MCU. And even Hugh Jackman himself was said, he would have loved, to be side by side with the Avengers. and all that stuff. I mean, it probably would have been good. I mean, it probably made a lot of money. I mean, obviously the MCU has made a lot of money since then, but at the time, when it was much newer, when the MCU was much newer, they had been able to make something happen with the, MCU and get Wolverine in there. I mean, maybe they would have gotten even much more money even faster than, they ended up getting it. But nonetheless, as time passed, as we all know, stuff started shifting more to the MCU because obviously the MCU became more of the definitive cinematic universe at that point, since it was being done by Marvel itself. But as things shifted, stuff started going away. Fox started slipping, as we all know, because at this point, Fox were getting very, very cautious, because they knew in their agreement from years ago they only had 7 years to keep producing films to keep their trilogy going with X-Men and all their other superheroes that they currently occupy with the MCU, because now that Disney had control, they knew that if they didn't keep making films, they were going to lose it, and they weren't going to get it back, obviously. So because of this, films started to slip, as we all know. And while Hugh was continuously putting out great performances for Wolverine and was still making money for the studios itself, other movies that were going around with Fox outside of Hugh were kind of going in the tank. 2015 not being the one we really want to mention, but unfortunately, yes, the Fantastic Four, which was an epic fail, didn't help the situation, of course, as we all know. Luckily, despite the fact that the studio had a bunch of slip-ups for 20th Century Fox, Hugh was still able to put out a farewell performance in Logan, which did make a lot of money. And they also, of course, as we all know, before this, they'd shifted a lot of the films for Wolverine to rated R, which was risky at the time, but obviously, as it showed, it still worked. X-Men can pretty much be, a family-friendly or a rated R film, as Fox proved. But it's still one of those things where it's like they had to go to rated R to get that audience, to continue getting that audience, because they knew the MCU was getting the family-friendly audience, so it was going to be kind of hard to compete with that. And so that's kind of why they probably shifted to that. And, of course, luckily, 20th Century Fox did hit lightning in the bottle in 2016 one last time with the emergence of Deadpool and Ryan Reynolds, who was actually good friends with Hugh Jackman. And because of this, Deadpool is at least Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool is probably going to be the only franchise to move over to the MCU, which he could easily do anyway, since he can just break the fourth wall. But because of that, and because Hugh kind of got a gig, that's probably going to be, unfortunately, Hugh Jackman's only biggest help for the transition of the 20th Century Fox Marvel properties that go to the MCU, is that Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool will preserve from the 20th Century Fox brand to the MCU, and everything else will pretty much be recasted, or at least I think that's what's going to happen. Unless they decide to do a Secret War, which would probably be cool for a lot of people if they did. But anyways, so with that, obviously Hugh helped a star get into the MCU. Unfortunately, in the whole 17 years of Hugh doing the Wolverine, unfortunately, Hugh himself probably will never get into the MCU. And, as we all know, after Logan, Wolverine, or I should say Hugh Jackman, decided to step down officially. Of course, 6 months later, as we all know, the official announcement of Wolverine, or for 20th Century Fox was being purchased by Marvel. Unfortunately, as Hugh said, he probably fears that that ship has sailed. And it probably has. Now, there has been a lot of fans that have been like, Hugh is going to be in the MCU. A lot of fans saying that he's not going to be in the MCU. Even fans that are fans of Hugh Jackman are even saying that he's not going to be in the MCU. Will he be in the MCU? Probably not. Would it be cool for him to be in the MCU? Absolutely. And I'll go on the record here to saying that despite the fact that a lot of people think that he cannot appear as Wolverine in the MCU because it would be acknowledging the 20th Century Fox movies, keep in mind that Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, in every sequel he does is pretty much a new character that he is playing as the Terminator. So it would be very easily where they could bring him in as Wolverine in the MCU, but just not acknowledge the previous films. That is very easily can be done. Will that happen? Probably not. But can it happen? Absolutely. But again, it would be up to Kevin Feige, who oversees the MCU universe, as well as it would be up to Hugh Jackman himself if he would want to come back. Hugh Jackman, I believe, is in his 50s, which is kind of old. Not that Hugh is in incredible shape, because he is. I mean, he is a machine when it comes to being in shape. He's kind of like Terminator, who's even older than him, and still keeps himself in shape. But the fact of the matter is that most likely, because Wolverine is still going to be around. Wolverine will be around. He will eventually make his way to the MCU. He's too much of a popular character for him not to. Now, who would be the new Wolverine? That's going to be probably the bigger question. If I was Kevin Feige, now I'm not Kevin Feige, but if I was Kevin Feige, I would not debut Wolverine in a Wolverine film, a solo Wolverine film. I'd put him in one of the group type films, or I would have him make a cameo in another film, similar to what they did with Spider-Man, where they made him appear in the Captain America film, Captain America versus Iron Man, Captain America Civil War is what it's actually called, but it was basically Captain America versus Iron Man. I would kind of do something similar to that. And why would I do this? Because if we are not having Hugh Jackman return as Wolverine, and we're having a new Wolverine take over, I would not want him to try to fill the shoes of Hugh Jackman, because, let's be honest, there's probably none of these Wolverine actors that Kevin Feige tries to audition to get is probably going to do the same type of work that Hugh Jackman could have done. Let's face that right now. So putting him in a solo film right off the bat, to me, would be a huge mistake. Because people are going to right away, compare him to Hugh. Which, you can't compare him to Hugh, because like I said at the beginning of this video, Hugh Jackman really defined that character and really kind of, again, laid the groundwork for what eventually became the MCU, despite the fact not actually officially being in the MCU. He was the MCU before the MCU was a thing, if that even makes sense. But that's basically where I'm saying is this is probably a character that's going to be probably the toughest for Hugh Jackman, or not Hugh Jackman, for some, is probably going to be the toughest character for Kevin Feige to replace, because he is a character that connects to a lot of the fans, especially a lot of the fans that are currently MCU fans. I mean, there are probably fans of the MCU that were fans of Hugh Jackman first, and probably still are fans of Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. So it's going to be a tough challenge for Kevin Feige to replace a character like that or replace an actor like that. So that's my kind of take on this. Will Hugh Jackman be the Wolverine again? Really, only time will tell. I mean, I'm pretty sure Kevin Feige has said that he's going to try to focus on the Fantastic Four. And honestly, I don't blame him, because the Fantastic Four was shit in 2015, and that really should probably be the first focus, because that is the franchise that probably be the easiest to get an all-star cast, as well as trying to get the Fantastic Four back on the map after the abomination of the 2015 film. So that would probably be the first franchise to probably try to introduce in the MCU and try to get it right. And probably wait on the X-Men a little bit, especially since Dark Phoenix is coming out this year. You don't want to have, an X-Men film around that has nothing to do with the MCU that you're basically now having to put out in the theaters, because now it's your film. Now that they own 20th Century Fox, they have to put that film out still, regardless of what everyone says. It's still going to happen. It's still going to theaters no matter how much money it makes. Disney's going to have to put that out this year, and so people are going to still have X-Men still fresh in their mind because of that. And because they're going to have X-Men fresh in their mind, having X-Men characters all of a sudden appear in the MCU this year would probably be a marketing mistake, because it's too fresh, and people will be wondering, well, does Dark Phoenix connect to the MCU, which it obviously won't. So that's probably why it's best that we don't have an X-Men, or Kevin Feige doesn't have an X-Men character appear this year, or probably next year. For that matter, that'd probably be better for them to focus on maybe Fantastic Four next year, if it's possible to get it done by next year. I'm sure they're not, because I'm sure Feige has all his plans ready for the next couple of years. Maybe he, squeezes something in because of the acquisition. I don't know what their maneuvering is. But in terms of, Hugh, in terms of him ever appearing in Endgames, in terms of him ever appearing in any future Avenger film, I guess, really, or, X-Men film, it's probably slim to none. But you never know with Hollywood. I will say that there is a chance. There's always a chance, but it's up to Feige and, of course, Hugh. If Hugh decides to come out of retirement, he has said he is retired since 2017. So that is my thoughts on this. Let me know what you guys think. Would you want to see Hugh Jackman back, or would you like to stay retired, or I don't know. Who do you think should be the new Wolverine if he takes over, or if someone else takes over? And how do you think they should set up Wolverine if they decide to have a new Wolverine? Or do you think they should just try to get Hugh back and do what I said, just not acknowledge the Fox films and just have him be Wolverine? Because you can do that. They've done it with Arnold. And they just did it in Super Bowl, even though, that's a voice actor and not like not a live action. It's still pretty much the same thing. It was a different character, but same name. That's basically kind of the same thing, really. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this. Comment, share, like, and that's about it, guys. I'm the SS Ultimate Goku, and I'm out of here. Peace.